Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Bitter Pill. Sorry I'm running a few minutes late. I had some stuff come up and um, I got caught up in watching a little of the U.S. Open tennis this afternoon, so I was lagging a little behind and getting a few things prepared. But so, anyway, tonight I wanted to talk about at least a couple of things. We'll see how things go time wise. Um, and so, Uh, first of all, I was kind of amazed at how much viewership I got on the video I did a couple of days ago about the interview of Cornel West by Jimmy Dore. Um, so, shoot, I guess I need to find that. Thought I had it already pulled up. You'd think I would have my own video pulled up. Anyway. Let's see, present, share screen. Yeah, I was kind of blown away that I got. Oh, let me go ahead and go to the video and shut off the. Comes on. Yeah, I had a video get over 1,000 views, um, which is a first for me. I have a pretty tiny channel, and judging from the number of dislikes and negative comments, I would say that a fair bit of that might be um, Jimmy Dore fans hearing about my criticism of his interview and coming over to give me shit. But whatever. I'm glad for the viewership and engagement, and hope that can continue. So, what I wanted to talk about tonight was a couple of things. Back to me. First of all, oh, by the way, Cornel West has actually done interviews since he was on Jimmy Dore. He keeps a pretty packed schedule, including one that I thought was pretty good with Jordan Chariton of Status Quo. And I have my disagreements with Jordan of Status Quo politically, but he's a good investigative reporter, and he seems this time at least to be pretty committed to third party, a third party presidential candidacy, and seems to really like Cornel West. But I thought it was a pretty good interview, and Cornel, addressed, of course, the interview with Jimmy Dore and how that kind of went south. And if you didn't hear me the other night, or better yet, watch the actual interview between Jimmy Dore and Cornel West, it was very contentious, and Jimmy gave Dore a lot of crap about. Jimmy gave Cornel a lot of crap about calling Biden a milquetoast neoliberal, but calling Trump a neo-fascist, and said basically he was killing his campaign by drawing such a sharp distinction between them politically, and alleged that Cornel was being, quote unquote, divisive by supposedly centering identity politics and cultural issues in his campaign rather than economic issues. But as I discussed, and showed on Cornel's website, that's false. His campaign, as well as his career as an activist, has been very much centered on class issues. But one reason I bring that up is that Cornel actually talked about what I was going to talk about as the first topic in tonight's video, which is basically that Democrats, ruling class Democrats, really go all out to portray any third-party candidacy, particularly one to their left. They don't care as much about libertarians or whatever. But anytime there's a Green Party candidate, for instance, they say, "Oh my gosh, you're gonna pull votes from our great Democrat Joe Biden or Hillary Clinton or whoever it is and spoil their election." And I wish I had thought to look it up, but Jordan from Status Quo played a collage of video segments from the past week or so in the corporate media, just within the past week, going on and on and on. Well, not on and on and on, but just repeatedly in every news outlet you can think of that supports Democrats or Biden. Oh, Cornel West is going to be a spoiler. Oh, gosh, we're so, what about Cornel West spoiling Joe Biden's reelection? Well, Cornel was asked about that, and he gave basically the same answer that I would and was going to give tonight, which is they're not honest when they say they're worried about that. They don't really fucking care if you quote unquote spoil their candidate's election, which I put that in quotation marks because our votes don't belong to anybody, right? They're our votes. We can choose to vote for whoever we want. If we're worried that it's going to make a big difference if Joe Biden rather than Donald Trump, or whichever Democrat rather than whichever Republican winds up being the nominees, wins, that it's going to be if voters really think that it's going to make that big a difference, they can just vote for Biden or whoever the Democrat is. They could have voted for Hillary Clinton. They could have voted for George Bush, etc. And as a matter of fact, back in 2016, a lot more Obama voters voted for Donald Trump than voted for Jill Stein. There were several million people who had voted for Obama who voted for Donald Trump in 2016. There were also millions and millions of Democrats, including a couple 100,000 in the crucial deciding state of Florida, who voted for George Bush in the 2000 election. And of course, there's all these people who don't vote. So, why is it all our fault? Which, we don't even like Democrats anyway. Most of us who support the Green Party or other, left-leaning third parties, we don't even like Democrats. There was a poll done following the 2016 election where they asked voters for third-party candidates. Jill Stein as a Green Party candidate for president, Gary Johnson, the Libertarian Party candidate for president. And they asked those people who they would have voted for if their favored candidate were not running? What if the choices were only Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump? Who would you vote for? And the majority of both the Jill Stein Green Party voters and the Gary Johnson Libertarian Party voters said they just wouldn't have voted. And yes, more Libertarian voters said they would have voted for Trump than would have voted for Clinton, and vice versa with the Green Party voters. But it wasn't that many of them. It was like, I don't have the exact figures called up, but it was something like 25% saying they would have voted for Clinton out of the Jill Stein voters if there had been no third-party candidates, and maybe 15% said they would have voted for Trump, and then all the rest, actually I think it was more like 2/3, not just 60%, said they would not have voted at all if they only had those two choices. Now, of course, that's never the case, right? There's always a third-party candidate. Go all the way back in history, you won't find an American election where there's not alternatives to whatever the two major parties have been, which for the past 150 years or so, it's been the Democrats and the Republicans. But anyway, getting back to the point, the Democrats really don't care about spoilers. They don't care that much if Donald Trump wins instead of Joe Biden or whoever it is that are the candidates of the respective major parties. How do we know they don't care? Well, they don't support ranked choice voting. They try to discourage you from voting third party regardless of whether or not you live in a swing state. And one thing that really annoys me about a lot of people who not the elite, not politicians, but just regular folks like Jordan Chariton of Status Quo in 2020, who were very insistent on the importance of voting for the Democrat instead of voting for a third party, to prevent Trump from winning. Even though he personally lives in New York, and lots of people who adopt this attitude don't live in a state where that would make any difference anyway. But anyway, so Democrats try to discourage you from voting third party, regardless of whether or not you live in a swing state. So, if this were a matter of being strategic, as opposed to a matter of simply trying to dampen the success of the Green Party or any other alternative to the Democrats, if they were actually doing this as a matter of strategy, then they wouldn't take this approach. They would say, if you live in a swing state, you better vote for our candidate. If you live in, say, California or New York or Indiana, which is very Republican, where I live, do whatever. And that's not the attitude they take. They are pushing to suppress third parties. They also don't push very hard for abolishing the Electoral College, even though they've lost 2 elections in this century, in 2000 and 2016, where their candidate had a majority of the popular vote. So Al Gore had a slim majority in 2000. If they had properly counted the votes, his majority would have been a little bigger. But there were some shenanigans, which we can get into some other time, I guess, in Florida. That meant that Bush won that state by about 500 votes, but he really should have lost by several thousand, at least, not even counting all the people that were disenfranchised as a result of efforts by Governor Jeb Bush in Florida and his associates, basically fraudulently disqualifying an awful lot of people, tens of thousands of people, from voting by falsely claiming that they were felons, which at the time you couldn't vote in Florida if you had a felony conviction. And, you know, the Democrats didn't really raise a fuss about that Republican election rigging in 2000 in Florida, or about, when basically the same thing happened using a different technique in 2016. Republicans were able to take, nationwide, millions of people off the voter registration lists prior to the 2016 general election on illegitimate grounds, like they would, for example, local Republican election officials would send postcards to voters, asking them if they were still at that address, and if they didn't get a response, they would remove people from the voter rolls. And the reason that they did this was that statistically, it's a whole lot more likely for poorer people, disproportionately people of color, but poorer people, to move and then not get the forwarded mail or what have you. But the Democrats have done very little about voter suppression. A few of them have tried to do something. Stacey Abrams from Georgia did, because she, in fact, lost the governor's race largely because of the voter suppression that Jeff Kemp, the Secretary of State there in Georgia, engaged in. So if they really care, they'll crack down on this, but they don't. Many people have alleged that the 2016 primary was rigged against Bernie Sanders, who polls throughout the primaries indicated where they compared various, there were just two Democratic candidates who got significant votes in those primaries, Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. So the polls compared how Hillary Clinton versus Bernie Sanders would do against Donald Trump, who ran away with the the Republican nomination in that election. And consistently, the polls showed that Bernie Sanders would have done significantly better against Trump in the general election than Hillary Clinton. Now, we don't know for sure what would have happened, but that's what the polls were suggesting. And most obvious example of how the 2016 primary was stacked against Bernie Sanders. The establishment really wanted Hillary Clinton to win, even though polls suggested she wouldn't have been as competitive a candidate against Donald Trump as Bernie Sanders would have been. Hundreds of so-called super delegates, the bigwigs in the Democratic Party who vote for who they're going to nominate or call delegates. And most of them are pledged delegates, meaning that their votes have to reflect the proportion of votes that were cast in the primaries by voters. But super delegates, who comprise, I think it's something like a third of the Democratic Party delegates, something like that, a third, a fourth, but a lot. Hundreds of them committed their votes to Hillary Clinton prior to any voters having voted in the primaries. And Sanders only won about 10% of those super delegates. The other 90%, in most cases, were already saying they were going to vote for Hillary Clinton before there were even any primaries. So, the mass media played a very disingenuous role in this by constantly showing what the delegate count was during the race, when the primaries actually started, where they included the superdelegate count, without necessarily mentioning that hey, these are people who have committed to vote, in most cases for Hillary Clinton, even though that doesn't reflect the will of the voters. So Sanders wound up losing quite a few states as a result of those superdelegate votes, where he had won the popular vote in those primaries by a landslide. So evidently, these Democratic Party bigwigs were a lot more concerned with making sure Bernie Sanders didn't get the nomination than they were with fielding the most competitive Democratic candidate against Donald Trump. And another thing that suggests that Democrats don't really care that much if Trump wins, although they're trying to stop him from running at all by throwing one after another criminal charge against him. And granted, there probably are legitimate things, criminal things that he's done, but you could certainly say the same thing about Joe Biden. But they would abolish the Electoral College. They would support ranked choice voting, where you can pick, like, let's say, for example, you preferred Cornel West, but if it came down to Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton, i.e., Cornel West didn't have enough votes to have any chance of winning, and so it was between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Did I say Clinton or Biden? I meant Biden. You could make Cornel West your first choice, but make Joe Biden your second choice if you prefer Joe Biden. That's how ranked choice voting works. So that would eliminate the spoiler problem. But the Democrats don't want to do that, because they don't care. Another indication that they don't really care, and this is another thing that Cornel West mentioned, is they seem very intent so far on sticking with Joe Biden, even though, as Jordan Chariton mentioned, lots and lots of recent polls were saying that almost every possible Republican nominee, including some who aren't actually announced as candidates yet, is polling ahead of Joe Biden. Donald Trump was a little bit ahead of Joe Biden. Ron DeSantis was even with Joe Biden. I think Ramaswamy was maybe a little bit behind Joe Biden, but Nikki Haley was ahead of Joe Biden by quite a lot. So, they don't seem to care that much that voters really don't like Joe Biden. His popularity ratings have been on par with or below what Donald Trump's were when Trump was president. Overwhelmingly, polls suggest that people think he's too old, and what they probably really mean is they think he's too senile, but pollsters aren't going to ask them that. So far they're riding with Biden. So let me see if I can. How do I do this? I don't remember. Okay, here we go. It's hard to do this quickly. I wish there was a way to do that. Oh, no wonder I don't have that comment called up. That's stupid. I wanted to read to you guys a comment by Caitlin Johnstone. Oh, I know where it is. Okay, so I just wanted to go back to the uh, interview of Cornel West by Jimmy Dore, and you reflect back on that um, and on my comments on it. Wow, up to 1,042 views now. That's more than I've had on any previous video, so I'm pretty happy about that. So as I said the other night, I agree with the point that Jimmy made during the interview that Cornell's characterization of Donald Trump as a neo-fascist and Joe Biden as a milquetoast neoliberal implies that there's a much bigger difference between them than there is. And in my view, fundamentally, they're both equally enemies of the working class. And I agree with Jimmy that he ought to avoid any implication that Biden is a lesser evil. And I think he needs to make a concerted effort to make clear that he recognizes the folly of his decision to support Biden in 2020. Now, of course, he is running against Biden as a Green Party candidate, and I think that some of the stuff that I've seen from some people to the effect that, oh, he's going to drop out and endorse Biden the way Bernie did. No, Green Party candidates do not do that. They run in the general election, and so he will be there in the general election. You're running against Joe Biden and Donald Trump, or whoever the nominees are. But he does need to make clear, oops, I fucked up in 2020. And I talked the other night about how what he said about that race just didn't come across very well. So he needs to address that. But as I pointed out, just showing Cornell's website, it's very clear that, and I'll, I guess, go back to that if I can do it quickly and easily. Yeah, if you look through Cornel West platform, there's no doubt this is a class-based campaign. Not going to read through all this, but you can go there and confirm or watch interviews with him. And in his interview with Jordan Chariton yesterday, he reiterated that his politics is always class-based. And that there's a big distinction between identity politics, a la what the Democrats do, which is what Jimmy Dore was accusing him of emphasizing, and a social justice movement that takes all aspects of oppression into account and interweaves class throughout its analysis of that oppression and its activism. Excuse me. And I thought that Caitlin Johnstone had a really good synopsis of why it's important to do what Cornel is doing and you talk about not just class but every issue. Here we go. So she says, it's not divisive to say the left must oppose racial injustice as well as economic injustice. It's divisive to say the left must ignore racial injustice and focus solely on economic injustice. You can't just tell marginalized groups to suck it up and put the injustices they face on the back burner because some white leftists experience cognitive dissonance when you talk about institutional racism or whatever. That's just saying the working class must remain divided along racial lines, in addition to all the other ways it's already divided against itself. You don't get class solidarity, which is key to building a powerful movement, by telling racial minorities and other disempowered groups, such as women, for example, gay and lesbian people, etc., that their unique problems aren't important. You get it by coming together and supporting each other. Those who say you need to ignore race and focus solely on class, or even, just de-emphasize race and focus almost exclusively on class, which is what Jimmy Dore seems to be advocating, are just the flip side of those who say you need to ignore class and focus solely on race. They're both power-serving attitudes in different ways. The former because it divides the working class against itself, and the latter because it corrals the left into innocuous political pursuits which don't threaten the powerful. The problem was never talking about race and social justice issues. It was talking about race and social justice issues to the exclusion of class issues. And Cornel isn't doing that. Okay, I won't read the whole thing here, but I thought her comment was really good. So I will provide a link. And just want to leave this with the point that if we adopted this approach of laser focus on class, ignore everything else, what kind of society would we be living in today? Would women have the right to vote? Would women have reproductive rights? Which in the United States, depending on the state, they kind of don't. But would they have won that in the first place? Would gay, lesbian, and bi people have won the rights that they have? to get married to somebody of the same sex, for example. There's always going to be certain groups within society that are oppressed in ways that other people are not. And, if we don't live in a society where we have the attitude that we, care about each other and are, empathetic toward and concerned about problems that other people have, even if those problems don't affect us, then we're never going to get anywhere. And I think this is really kind of a philosophical difference between people like Jimmy Dore, who's more sort of very libertarian and individualistic, and somebody like Cornel West, who is a socialist self-avowed socialist, and as a collectivist. He thinks about society as a whole, and everybody is his brother or is his sister. He uses those terms to refer to people, and he really seems to mean that he cares about the well-being of everybody. And so, if you adopt that attitude, then you're not gonna only engage in activism or political campaigning or whatever that focuses on issues that affect almost everybody. You're gonna basically just look at where's the injustice in society, where are the problems in society, what is the truth about these things, and work to worked in organized movements for change regarding all those issues, not just some of them. I just wanted to comment on the titles of the videos Jimmy Dore made about the interview with Cornel West. So as I mentioned the other night, the way he titled the actual interview was Cornel West does 45-minute commercial for Joe Biden, which that's a ridiculous characterization. He's very critical of Joe Biden, even if he doesn't use the terminology that Jimmy would prefer for talking about Biden versus Trump, which, I agree that Cornel should use different terms to talk about and compare those two candidates, but he's very critical of Joe Biden, certainly. Jimmy Dore reacts to Cornel West interview, most depressing 45 minutes of my life, he says. And, oh, by the way, the person who did a commercial, literally, in the interview with Cornel West was Jimmy Dore at the very end of the interview, which, if you watched it, he did an infomercial for this alternative health products promoted and sold by one of the doctors that he interviewed on his show, who's like him, anti-COVID vaccines. He did another short video. Cornel West dismisses harm by COVID lockdowns and vaccine mandates. He's super out of touch. Now, if you watch the interview, that's an absurd characterization. He actually largely agreed with Jimmy in being opposed to vaccine mandates. And did say, well, yeah, it's unfortunate that the way the lockdowns were implemented and the vaccine mandates did cost people bothered by that, and got very offended when Jimmy accused him during the interview of not caring about that. Okay. One other thing I wanted to cover was Jimmy's video that he just put out yesterday, shortly after the Cornel West interview, where he mischaracterized a CDC report on COVID vaccines. So what Jimmy claimed was that the CDC said that vaccinated people were more likely than unvaccinated people to catch the new COVID variant. Now, what did the CDC actually say? Because you can probably surmise that that isn't what they said. Well, let's go to the CDC report about this new variant. Okay, risk assessment summary for SARS-CoV-2 sublineage BA286. CDC has detected a new SARS-CoV-2 variant labeled BA286. CDC is continually monitoring for new variants and studying their potential impact on public health. All viruses, including the virus that causes COVID-19, change over time. These viruses with changes are called variants. These changes can affect how contagious a virus is, how well it responds to treatment, and how severely it affects people. Last week, a new variant of SARS-CoV-2 called BA286 was detected in samples from people in Denmark and Israel. This variant is notable because it has multiple genetic differences from previous versions of SARS-CoV-2. Based on what CDC knows now, existing tests used to detect and medications used to treat COVID-19 appear to be effective with this variant. BA286 may be more capable of causing infection in people who have previously had COVID or who have received COVID-19 vaccines. Scientists are evaluating the effectiveness of the forthcoming updated COVID-19 vaccine. CDC's current assessment is that this updated vaccine will be effective at reducing severe disease and hospitalization. At this point, there's no evidence that this variant is causing more severe illness. That assessment may change as additional scientific data are developed. So Jimmy and the person that he follows, who I think he got this misinformation from, thinks that the CD is saying that people who have been vaccinated are more likely to be infected by BA286 than people who aren't vaccinated. You notice that isn't what they said. What they said was BA286 may be more capable of causing infection in people who have previously had COVID-19 or who have received COVID-19 vaccines, and they stopped there, which they shouldn't have. That's not clear wording, but given the context, what they clearly mean here is that it's more capable of causing infection in people who previously had COVID-19 or received COVID-19 vaccines, or people who haven't, than previous variants are. And all the research that has been done recently on COVID variants, which for the past year and a half have been Omicron related variants, they still find some capacity, depending on how long it's been since people were vaccinated or previously had COVID, or how many vaccines they've had, or all sorts of different factors, how much of the virus you're exposed to, etc. All in all, it's still fine that people who are vaccinated are less likely to get COVID than people who are not vaccinated. Now, certainly, as the COVID virus has mutated, as SARS-CoV-2 has mutated, the vaccines that people have gotten have been more and more different from the currently circulating variants in terms of what they protect against. So, most people in the United States, got 2 shots that were designed to protect against the original version of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, and they still provide protection against other variants, but especially in terms of preventing infection, less so, because they're not as tailored to the particular genetic makeup of current variants. And there are more recent vaccines that are formulated to protect against some Omicron related variants. But especially if you haven't had a vaccine in a while, it's not going to be as good a protection as in the past. But there's never been any case where people who are vaccinated are more likely to get infected than people who are not vaccinated. That is just straight up misinformation from Jimmy Dore. And finally, I just wanted to follow up on something I briefly commented on at the end of the video I made about the Jimmy Dore interview with Cornel West, where basically where's what I said about that? Okay, never mind. Oh, okay. So at the end of the interview, Jimmy brought up COVID and talked about the, in his opinion, horrible harm done by lockdowns and vaccine mandates. And he read out a long statement from the Green Party's Black Caucus opposing lockdowns and vaccine mandates, which really reads like it was written by the Libertarian Party, because it is very centered on the right of refusal of a small percentage of people who are adamantly against taking the vaccine that they're willing to quit their job if their employer asked them to, required them to get vaccinated, mandated that they get vaccinated. Not even considering that, there are a lot of people who are, immunocompromised or elderly or what have you, who either are more likely to get sick with COVID than the average person, or mainly just that they're likely to get more sick, which isn't to say that if you're young and healthy, you can't get really sick from COVID. But, in any case, what about those people? What about trying to protect them from, getting infected by somebody who's not vaccinated, or, getting so severely infected that they get hospitalized because they got a huge dose of the virus when they got infected. And, if you saw the interview, you saw that Cornel West largely agreed with the Black Caucus of the Green Party statement that opposed COVID vaccine mandates and lockdowns. He agreed with their opposition to mandates. I'm not so sure about lockdowns, but agreed with what they said about it causing large numbers of people to be fired from their jobs, and economic calamity and for many working class people and so forth. But that wasn't enough for Jimmy. Jimmy got all excited that Cornel West was agreeing with the Black Caucus of the Green Party's point of view. But then Dore still got really mad at Cornell because he wouldn't agree that lockdowns and vaccine mandates were like the quintessential issue of modern times or something. And I guess what I wanted to point out here is that you know there's plenty of evidence that the lockdowns and the vaccine mandates really did make a difference, as did mask mandates. So let me show you some evidence about that. So this is an article from New Scientist magazine summarizing some research showing that non-vaccine measures such as social distancing and wearing face masks have been unequivocally effective at preventing the spread of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, according to a major report by the UK's Royal Society. The main non-vaccine measures used to control the COVID-19 pandemic, including lockdowns, face masks, and test, trace, and isolate, were effective at stemming the spread of the SARS-CoV-2 coronavirus, according to reviews of thousands of studies done around the world. They work, said Mark Walport at the UK's Royal Society, who chaired an expert working group behind a major report based on the reviews. The measures saved lives by preventing many people from being infected until after vaccines and drug treatments had been developed. The findings are important because there will be another pandemic at some point, he says. There could be something that's much worse than SARS-CoV-2. How well those measures worked varied depending on how and when they were implemented, but they were still unequivocally effective, particularly when used in combination when levels of infection were low, the report says. I personally, along with my colleague Bob Sinclair, have done research on these particular issues, like what different states in the United States and provinces in Canada did as far as infection prevention measures like mask mandates and lockdowns and testing and so forth, and what different countries around the world did. And basically, what we found is that the more that different countries or different states or provinces did to try and prevent COVID infections, and the sooner they did them, the lower their rates of COVID infections and deaths. That's what we found in our research, some of which has been published in a peer-reviewed journal. And well, first let me show this. This is an article I wrote. One or two articles I wrote responding to some claims that Jimmy Dore and a economist, I believe it was an economist that he brought on the show, who claimed that lockdowns didn't work, and did a very cherry-picked study that purported to show that lockdowns didn't work in reducing deaths from COVID. So he and his colleague, this person who Jimmy Dore interviewed, Steve Hankey, a fellow at the Libertarian Cato Institute, and his colleagues did purported to do a systematic review and meta-analysis, looking at studies on lockdowns, and basically they just cherry-picked studies that showed the weakest effects, and then further cherry-picked the data from one of them that showed the smallest effect of all, and basically, weighted that study disproportionately and concluded, quote unquote, that lockdowns only reduce deaths by 0.2%. But yeah, there are dozens of studies that show, as you might expect, the way I titled my blog post was "The Science of Immaculate Infection," because basically, if you're claiming that lockdowns work, you're claiming that if people aren't near each other versus if they are near each other, that doesn't make any difference in how likely they are to get infected with COVID or get seriously ill and perhaps die. That's absurd. That's completely ludicrous, contrary to all common sense claim. So, if you do a study that finds that these various measures that we call under the collective label lockdowns don't work, there's something wrong with your study. Because if you take measures that make it much more difficult for people to infect each other, they're not going to infect each other as much. It's not rocket science. So anyway, there have been dozens of studies that show that they work. I've linked to several of them in this article. And then what I did here was just do a comparison of four different countries that all engaged in various measures to try to prevent COVID infections. But they did them, and their timing was very different. And also the strictness. So the U.S. and U.K. Basically took an approach to controlling the COVID outbreaks that were going on in early 2020, labeled mitigation, which is they didn't do nothing, but they didn't do nearly as much as they could. So they didn't shut down their borders. They didn't really restrict travel within the country. They didn't necessarily mandate masks. Every state in the United States had some school closures, but they didn't necessarily close businesses. Some were, some weren't, and they just didn't do enough to control COVID spread. But whereas China and New Zealand had very strict lockdowns where they didn't let anybody in and out of the country, for example, and they engaged in mass testing and contact tracing, tracked every single case of COVID that they found. It required anyone who tested positive to isolate immediately until they were no longer infectious. The U.S. and the U.K. didn't do anything like that. And frankly, they couldn't, because by the time they got around to implementing infection restriction measures, they already had huge widespread community transmission. And really the biggest difference, according to the analysis I did of the data on when they locked down and what their case rates were, was China and New Zealand just implemented their lockdown measures much, much sooner than the U.S. and the U.K. did. And so they had astoundingly different death rates, confirmed death rates. So as of July 12, 2020, the UK and the United States had 599 and 477 deaths per million people from COVID. New Zealand and China had 4 and 3, respectively. So, I'm not sure how you can reconcile that ginormous difference with the notion that lockdowns don't work. Okay, last thing I wanted to touch on was just some one of many studies you can find showing that vaccine mandates also worked. Study finds COVID vaccine mandates significantly reduce infection rates on college campuses. New research from the Ohio State University College of Medicine finds that COVID-19 vaccine mandates are highly effective at reducing the spread of the virus and increasing immunity in a university setting. The study, published in the journal PLS Pathogens, found net viral loads among all community members declined after university vaccine requirements went into effect. Masking, isolation, and antibodies from getting sick weren't enough to decrease infection rates by themselves, because not everybody was doing them probably. People weren't legally required to isolate themselves if they were sick with COVID, for example. When we supposedly had a mask mandate here in Bloomington, Indiana, where I live, a very liberal college town, I'd say only 70% of people wore masks, and they often weren't very good ones or weren't worn properly. But in any case, what they found was that once vaccines were required, so you had college campuses all over the country, suddenly having 90+% vaccination rates, rates of COVID, not just on campus, but in the general community, declined significantly compared to what they had been before or what they were on campuses that did not mandate vaccines. There's other studies like this that show the same thing. So in any case, if you're philosophically community oriented, you want to do what's best for the public health of the community, rather than just what you yourself might prefer. I don't want to get vaccinated, so I'm not going to do it. And nobody can make me, as opposed to, I'm going to get vaccinated because, it may protect me from getting infected. It will, if I do get infected, it will have a high likelihood of preventing me from getting seriously ill. It'll reduce the likelihood of me getting somebody else sick, and I don't want to do that. I don't want to make other people sick. So that's going to be your orientation. Now, granted, as the COVID virus has evolved, gotten more infectious, it's become a lot harder for vaccines to prevent infections. And so, for example, you had the country of China, or mainland China anyway, basically lift the majority of its infection prevention measures, in late 2022, and suddenly, almost everyone in China got COVID. Like 85 to 90% of the population is estimated got COVID, despite there having a 90+% vaccination rate. Vaccines certainly aren't a magic bullet, but there were several factors to take into consideration that accounted for how rapid and wide the spread of COVID was after they lifted their mitigation measures. For one thing, hardly anybody had gotten infected before, so they didn't have that additional protection of prior infection as well as vaccines. They didn't have a really high booster rate. And it had been a while since they gotten vaccinated. And moreover, the vaccines that they used, Sinovac, and I forget what the other ones are named, even initially were not quite as effective in reducing the rate of infections as some of the other vaccines around the world, although very, very effective at preventing severe illness. But anyway, even so, Even today, studies are still showing that vaccinated people are less likely to get infected with COVID, and far, far less likely to get severely ill or die. And of course, getting severely ill means you have to be hospitalized, and you're driving somebody else's health insurance costs up when you wind up in the hospital because you didn't get vaccinated. So anyway, and what can I say? Jimmy Dore promotes these views that vaccines are bad, they don't work, and they're dangerous, and masks don't work, and lockdowns didn't work, and all they did was cause economic calamity for the working class and so forth. And I'm sorry, but it's the data don't support what you believe, Jimmy. And YouTube, by the way, YouTube algorithm. I'm saying that I disagree with what Jimmy Dore says. I believe that vaccines work. I believe that masks work. And lockdowns worked, etc. So please don't censor me. But anyway, let's see. Is there anything else I wanted to say? Okay, I believe that's about it for tonight. So again, if you hear Democrats say, "Oh, you're gonna spoil the election if for Joe Biden if you vote for Cornel West," they're not serious. They just don't want people to vote for a third-party candidate. They don't want the Green Party to become a success. So they'll do anything they can to discourage people from voting for the Green Party. Donald Trump was president for 4 years. It wasn't he wasn't great. Not great when Democrats are president either. But we survived Donald Trump. And Democrats, you really don't care as much as they claim about who wins presidential elections. And what else? I have my criticisms of him, but I think Cornel West is a great candidate, and I think that his candidacy combined with the growing frustration that large segments of the working class have in this country with their economic situation and all the money that's being wasted on the war in Ukraine and various other things that don't help us. And the labor movement seems to be having a resurgence. So I really think that between all of those things, we might be on the cusp of a resurgence of social movements that will be vastly more successful than the big disappointment that the Bernie Sanders movement turned out to be. So fingers crossed. All right, I will see you guys next time.